Well, hello and welcome back, my friend. Today I'm joined by John Mollura, and John has just gone from being a rocket scientist, literally leading teams at NASA, to then doing photography and some of his stuff for National Geographic. And now he's helping men and women actually with coaching to help them find their identity. And as we get into John's story, you're going to see where, it's not where you're at that is really like a life sentence, so to speak. You're going to see from John's story that it's like the awareness, the work, the having a goal and moving towards where you want to be. It's all a transformative process, and you're never stuck until you decide to let yourself be stuck. So I hope you'll take the encouragement and just the inspiration from John's story today. John, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm good. Nice to finally be with you, Mike.
Yeah, I had some stuff going on this side. And then when it was like, okay, John, things are calm enough on this side. Can we get together? You were very generous to say, yeah, I've got some time. Let's make this happen. So I appreciate it. Thank you,
Yeah,
John.
no problem. Well, I wouldn't be coaching in authenticity about empathy if I didn't model it myself. So my pleasure, Mike. And I'm glad to, we've been in contact a little bit, and I'm glad to,
Yeah.
see things are, on the positive uptick for you. So that's great, brother.
Yeah, they definitely are. I appreciate it. Well, let's jump in first thing, man. Like, what does life look like on the professional side?
I am in a period of transition, and so you mentioned about me being a literal rocket scientist. So for 15 years, right after I graduated from Penn State University, I landed a job working with space systems. And I got that job because I chose to learn how to teach rock climbing when I was in college. And the way I got the job working for NASA was not because I had a 4.0 GPA. Like, school was super difficult for me. Like, always struggled in school. And the way I landed that job at NASA was teaching rock climbing. And the person that was reading my resume said, "What's this about teaching rock climbing on here? That's not a normal thing we get on an engineering resume of someone right out of college." But I led teams, in college. I didn't kill anybody. I thought, that showed some responsibility. So they said, "Hang on, there's someone we want you to actually speak to." And this guy got on the phone. It was a phone interview. And this guy said, "Hey, what do you think about rock climbing on Mars?" Didn't introduce himself. I had no idea who this person was. And I very flippantly said, "I don't know, are you going to pay my airfare?" And I thought I blew the interview right there. I was like, "Yep, there's my mouth that my dad always told me to get me in trouble. There it is." But this phantom voice on the other end of the phone said, "Get him down here." And then he was gone. Turns out the man's name was Skip Wilson that they brought on. He was in charge of testing all the landing systems for the Mars Pathfinder missions that landed in the 90s. And they were ramping up to do the Mars exploration rovers in 2003. This is the guy that led the landing teams that did all the testing. He was former special forces in Vietnam. And the reason why he said he wanted me on his team to come down for an interview was, he said, "I don't need another egghead." He said, "I need someone that's smart enough, but I can send out into the field and not get themselves or my other team members killed." So I ticked all those boxes, and that's how I ended up working for NASA. So anyone that's out there that thinks, you need to have stellar grades, like, work as hard as you can and learn what you can. But a lot of times it's so much more the additional skills that we learn throughout our life and our career that really help us reach that next level. And a lot of times that elite level that other people are like, "How did you even end up here?" It's by creating this alchemy of all these life experiences and these weird skills. Like, maybe how to speak Mandarin Chinese and drive a forklift because that's what you did in high school. You worked at Lowe's, and that could lead to something in your 30s that you can't even imagine right now. So just be open to new possibilities. And that has been a theme that's carried with me throughout my life. I mentioned I was in transition. A few years ago, about 8 years ago, I transitioned out of engineering and started doing my photography full time. People are always like, that's a big transformation. Like, how did you do that? Or why? And the truth was who I had become, which I'm sure we'll get into later, who I'd become didn't align with that job I was doing in engineering anymore. But I was able to use those skills that I had learned doing these test operations for NASA and military projects, because we had extensive travel. They would send me and my teams off for like weeks at a time to some base somewhere and go test something and make sure it works. When I say test something, I mean like on a rocket sled track, like launching something through the desert, like Wile E. Coyote style. That's why I have like all these Wile E. Coyotes behind me, because he was my spirit guide through so much of that. But during that time, you can imagine the amount of red tape that would surround something like that, right? I became very adept at reading people and developing rapport very quickly in high-speed, tight-knit communities, which a lot of times these places we'd go up to or we'd show up at would be. So my job was to make sure things happened. So that ability that I had honed over all these years at, these test sites in Timbuktu to Antarctica, I was able to talk to people and establish rapport. Well, guess what? That helps a lot with photography, because a lot of people don't want to get in front of the camera, right? They feel very awkward. So when I transitioned into photography, I took those skill sets, and photography is there's a lot of tech involved in it. It's changing now. The game is changing, obviously, with AI and with cell phones and all that stuff. But when I was starting professionally, that wasn't really around. So I was able to use all my nerdy engineering side of my brain, marry it up with the creative side of my brain, and then the ability to talk to people and build a decent photography business. But then what I started noticing over the past few years, because I do a lot of headshots and portraits and I work with photographing people, it was no longer about just developing a rapport with people to get them in front of the camera and feel comfortable. People I noticed, have had such a negative self-image about themselves over the past probably 2 years. It seemed to really just amplify. And I realized I was coaching people to get them in front of the camera. And I thought, what if I actually flipped it and worked with people on the front end, coaching them, so then they would, to build their confidence to get in front of a camera or go after that job or do whatever it is they've always wanted to do in their life. And that was kind of forced on me because my photography business, especially like this time last year when inflation ramped up, like the arts a lot of times, unfortunately, are the first thing to go when people start constricting their budget. So I was like, I had this kind of inkling, like I wanted to do speaking and coaching. Well, then my photography business slowed way down and I had found myself with free time. So I built a coaching program that evolved into what's called the Elite Level Confidence. It's all about helping people switch from being stuck in their life to soaring. And the people that I like to work with are, the me I used to be. Those people that have the awards, they have the degrees, they have the accolades, whatever that is, but they still just kind of feel stuck. And what I learned throughout my own journey, which I mentioned, leaving engineering because it wasn't in alignment with who I was, I work with people a lot on understanding who they are, like why they respond the way they do, and how that translates into the decisions they make or the choices they don't make. And that is what I built my coaching program up on in my keynote, Elite Level Confidence, to help people see who they truly are. And then a big thing that I talk a lot about is ways they sabotage themselves that they don't even realize. So the coaching and the speaking is picking up. I'm speaking in front of audiences like hundreds of people, so that's really great to see the message resonate with people so much, to grow so quickly like that. But it's been a lot of work to get to that point. But again, all those skills I developed along the way have helped it, just get off the ground. Like all those presentations I gave as an engineer, the Toastmasters clubs that I was a part of when I was in corporate that my boss wanted me to go to, all those experiences have really just ramped up being a photographer, knowing how to do my own graphic design now, like putting together my workbook, which I'll share with people, if they want to check it out on my website, johnmollura.com/free stuff. Like all that stuff has added up together to end up where I am now professionally.
Yeah, that is one crazy ride.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
the way
Tell me
you've
about
picked.
it.
Yeah. I'm like, that's not one that you set out on this trajectory of, I want to do this and I'm going to pick up this and,
Yeah.
kind of go through all the things that you have. And I think there's a few things that are interesting to me is it's like, we can get in our own head and think, I have to fit this mold to get this job, right? As far as working at NASA, like you said, that wasn't the route you were going. It wasn't what you were looking to do. You weren't like fitting in the carbon copy of what they had. They wanted somebody with a different skill set to make sure that everybody else that was the egghead, wasn't setting them up for failure.
Right.
And then I think the other thing, John, man, like we can have those accolades, all the success, and yet like you're talking about the doubts, the insecurity, kind of those beliefs that are limiting us and causing us to undermine our own success and think we're the only one. And yet it's pervasive when we start talking about it, where it's like, hey, yeah, I've done this, but it's almost like carrying an anchor up your career ladder, right? Trying to be successful and accomplish these other things. Your emotions and doubts can just hold you back. So I'm looking forward to digging into that stuff more. But
Yeah.
Just from what you've shared, I'm like, yep, I've worked with other men that it's like, that was what was holding them back. Let's jump from the professional side to the personal side. What does your personal life look like today?
Yeah. So I've been married. We're actually getting ready to celebrate our 21st wedding anniversary. And we have 3 kids, youngest being 11, and then 2 teenagers, one of which just got their driver's license. So that's the personal side of things. And although, if you look at our Google Calendar, our family calendar, like we're it's extremely full. Like, we're running people here, there, doing all the sports, all the school things. Well, school just let out, but doing all those things. But there is a sense of underlying peace, because when people hear that we have 2 teenage girls in the house, they're like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." I'm like, "Why are you apologizing?" They're like, that must be really tough. And I'm like, it actually isn't.
Yeah.
And the reason why I said there's like this pervasive peace throughout is because my wife and I have worked as a team for the past 16 years, parenting, communicating about, how we should respond, and then responding as a team to our kids.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is our kids are making solid choices, life choices with, who they hang out with their schoolwork, with just the choices they make. So we're actually able to enjoy our time together with them and have them, be, well, as happy as teenagers can be and functional as teenagers can be. But in all seriousness, we're seeing a lot of the fruits of the labor with that, where we don't really worry about our kids. Like my wife and I went for a bike ride yesterday. It's not like, oh man, what are the kids getting into? Are they going to be, smoking cigarettes on the roof, overlooking the pond, or are they going to be just doing whatever it is we told them to do? So, but being on the same page with my wife and I, and having that constant dialogue back and forth, has been, why we've made it over 20 years in marriage and are, raising kids that we have a positive relationship with. It's because my wife and I put in the work together. And another big part of that is, if we make a mistake, whether it's, interacting with each other, my wife and I, or if my wife and I make a decision and that's how we, present it to our kids, and we screw that up, we make sure to admit that we've made a mistake, because we wanted to model to our kids, if you make a mistake, it is not the end of the world. Own it, figure out what you can do differently, and then, do whatever you can not to make that mistake again. So that's what it's like on the personal side. Full, but peaceful.
Well, congratulations. Happy anniversary. That is huge.
Thanks.
And also on your children, because it's like you're teaching them, like you said, that mistakes aren't permanent. They're not fatal. They're not final. And, also grace, right? Because it's like from our mistakes, okay, yeah, I can get back up and try again. So I think that's, really like a crucial thing to understand, because so many of us we live small because when we've made those mistakes, the reactions of people have kind of trained us to, live in this small box so that we don't get, repercussions or
Right.
berated in the process of, the fallout from it. Right.
Yeah.
So I want to go back. You talked about, being at NASA as a rocket scientist. You're leading teams, getting accolades and all kinds of, promotions and awards, right? But yet there's kind of this internal doubt. And it's, what you're also seeing in people like you talked about, particularly these last couple of years. For you at that time frame back at NASA, like, where do you see that kind of came from? Like, what was the growth path for that to be present for you? And how do you begin removing that? Was that something that happened at NASA, or was that later on that really helped, like, that whole identity to be stronger later on for you?
Yeah, when I took that job, and for much of my, adolescent and adult life, I was a mess. No one knew it, but I had very high levels of anxiety, panic attacks, and I was born in the late 70s, so that's not something you talked about in the 1980s and 1990s. Like, my kids now have like counseling classes where they learn breathing techniques at a public school. Like, that wasn't happening in the 80s and 90s, right? It was the, suck it up buttercup kind of mentality. The space shuttle, Challenger exploded, and it was like, oh, all right, well, back to work, everybody. It's like there was no, it was a different time. So I didn't have that skill set of how to work through anxiety or communicate, and neither did, there just wasn't the support that there is now and the understanding around that. So fast forward to getting into adult life, I got put in, I got on this team, put a lot of pressure on myself, and that's not a bad thing, right? Like, people were counting on me. We're working on important stuff. It was important to me. You want to do a good job. But I started putting so much pressure on myself that it just ramped up the anxiety. And I was so worried. I had such low self-esteem and self-confidence, which, I mean, that's the root of a lot of my issues. Was I just didn't believe I had worth. I didn't believe I had capability, despite, like you said, getting awards and all this other stuff. I didn't believe it. Imposter syndrome's been, in the news a lot the past few years. Just that feeling like you were going to be found out. Like, I really felt like that. And in order to combat those feelings, I would take on even more high pressure jobs, even more potentially hazardous projects and missions. Like, just because subconsciously I was probably thinking, if I do this, if I'm successful at this, then I'll be okay. Then I'll feel good about myself. Well, guess what? Nope. The exact opposite thing. Then, then like, I felt like I've built this house of cards up so high that, if I made one mistake, like, it was all just going to crash down. That's why it's so important for my wife and I to model grace to our kids, is because I didn't extend any grace to myself. I didn't think people were going to give it to me. I thought if I made one mistake, like, that was going to be it. I was going to lose my job, and, everything would fall apart. So I created this superhero, like, veneer and reputation in the professional communities I worked with. But inside, I was like, I was so scared of losing that, I would do whatever I could to maintain it, which unfortunately meant I would use that ability that I mentioned earlier, that to develop rapport and really read people quickly.
Yeah.
I was like Darth Vader with the Force, dude. I used that power for darkness. Like, if I felt my reputation or anything were being questioned, like in a meeting, like someone would be like, what if you do it this way? Like, I would like just cut their legs out from underneath them. And I'd be able to, because I would know what kind of words and how to talk to someone to hurt them, to shut them up.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not a period of my life that I am proud of, but I'm sharing that because if there are other listeners out there that are feeling or recognizing those types of behaviors in themselves, I want them to realize that is not a life sentence. That is not a life sentence. You can do what I did, which was start taking stock of why you're doing that. And the reason why I started eventually taking stock of why am I behaving like a, well, he said to keep it PG. Why am I behaving like a cotton-headed knitting muggins? Like, we'll just leave it at that. It came about. What really put me the mirror in front of myself was losing one of my best friends that I grew up with. I looked up to him like an older brother. He was unfortunately one of the 22 a day veterans that take their own lives. And when we lost him in 2009, it came right on the heels of us having our first child too. So I was already like worried about being not a good father, because I was still in this mire of like, I'm not good enough. I'm going to let people down. If I make one mistake, everything's going to fall apart. So I was worried about that when we had our first kid, and then we lost my friend to suicide. It just put me in this like fog, in this like haze that, looking back, it's like I was in a depression. It went beyond anxiety. It was a depression, and it got to the point where I'm like, I don't know how to get out of this. Maybe I shouldn't be here either. And that was in 2009. And up until that point, I hadn't prayed or done anything spiritually for probably 15 years. Since the day I walked out of Catholic high school, I wanted nothing to do with that. And I would say to people, if I found out they were spiritual, it didn't matter. Like, if they were Christian, Muslim, Jew, whatever, I'd have the mentality. And sometimes I would actually say this to people, like, what, are you too weak to do life on your own? You need a God. So I said I was a cotton-headed ninny muggins, dude. I really was. Equal opportunity offender. That was me. So I say that to drive home the importance of what happened next. So I'm sitting in the bathroom by myself. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I want to go on. And for the serenity prayer just popped in my head, like seemingly out of nowhere. Accept what is, let go of what was, and let me have the wisdom to know the difference. Hadn't prayed in a decade and a half, popped in my head. And as soon as I said that prayer, a warm sensation like flowed over me from head to toe. And I thought, I've either just actually lost my mind and totally cracked up, or B, maybe there's something to this God thing. So that's the day where, the proverbial scales fell from my eyes, where I started, I just had this intense desire to see how I was showing up in the world, and really seeing who I was and how I was treating people. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just awful to people. So I started taking stock of what would trigger me, like in a meeting. Like when I would laugh, because, I'd always know when I do it. You say that quip, right? Or you say that smart aleck remark, and it feels good for like a nanosecond, and then the shame starts in, and then it's like, I can't believe I said that. Well, I'm not going to apologize. Then I'll look stupid. All that stuff. So I started taking stock of when that would happen. And then I would start apologizing and start realizing when I get those feelings coming up and working to like throttle them back or like reframe things in my mind. So this is like in the 2010, 2011 timeframe. So that was where I really started to transition of who I was and really working on myself. And then as my faith and Christianity and Jesus grew, I, started getting my act more and more together to the point where some people would come up to me. They're like, what's going on with you? You're like totally different than you were when I worked on that project with you like 4 years ago, which felt really good. So here I am, on the Jesus train, getting my life turned around, becoming a kinder, more graceful person, using that empathy, not like Darth Vader would, but, using the empathy to actually connect with people and help them. The company that I had worked for now for over 10 years did all this really cool stuff. The venture capitalists took over, which anyone out there in the business world knows venture capitalists are interested in money. Like that's what they're there for. The company really pivoted and changed directions and kind of left the work I was doing like kind of just out in the breeze. And if nothing else, it was kind of vilified because we weren't making huge dollar amounts on what we were doing, especially my group, because our group was test and evaluation. So a lot of times we would get whatever it was we were building and kind of come back and say to the design engineers, here's all the pieces we think it didn't work like the PowerPoint said. It, quote, energetically disassembled is how I'd write it up when things will just blow up and explode. So the management was not a fan of our group. By that time, I worked up to being the lead, test engineer in our group. The man Skip, who I mentioned, hired me. They asked me if I was going to rock climb on Mars. He was a wonderful mentor to me. We lost him in 2012 to cancer, way too soon. So I was in this new age of becoming of, kinder, gentler version, but no less, my kids say bad butt, performance wise. When he passed away in 2012, I was kind of left without like any backup I felt. And then the anxiety started up again. And then the company started changing directions. And I started leaning more into my photography, which I'd always loved. I'd always been a lifelong photographer. I got my first camera when I was like 7 and turned it into a side hustle, just take pictures of events and whatever, sell people fine art prints. And eventually got to the point where I left that engineering company and went to another one. And the other engineering company I went to, I was making 6 figures. They were flying me first class around the world to rep the company in like China and like all the things, right? I love the people I work with, but Mike, I'd never been so miserable in my life and unfulfilled. Had a great title. Like I said, the people I worked with were just fantastic, but just day to day, hated every minute of sitting behind that desk. And finally, my wife said to me she's like, "You look miserable. Like your skin kind of has the pallor of like a wet ashtray. You okay?"
Oh, jeez.
I'm like, "No, I'm not good." And we talked for quite a while, and she said, "Well, what if you turned your side hustle photography into your full-time job?" Which blew me away because my wife is very much the planner. If you're, if any of your listeners are into like the Enneagram, like personality types, like she is like the stereotypical one, like model child, follows the rules. Everything has, we got plans, we've got contingency plans, all that stuff. So for her to say like, what if you left this nice, cushy, high paying job and, became a photographer was just mind blowing. But we prayerfully made the decision that in April of 2017 is when I left engineering and started doing photography full time.
Wow. Where were you as far as like the doubts of who you are? I mean, had you grown into the confidence, the self-assuredness, the like owning your identity at that point when you made that transition from engineer to photographer?
I hadn't reached the point where I'm like, this is who I am yet. But the point I had reached was I knew who I wasn't. I can just remember sitting in meetings and talking to my engineering colleagues, and they'd be talking about like, I don't know, the muscle cars they were doing, or the antique tractors they're building, or like, I don't know, designing their own springs at home. And I'm like, what? No, this isn't me. It's like the Bob Dylan song, "They Ain't Me, Babe."
Yeah.
But
You're like, I'm not fitting in at this
yeah,
place here.
yeah,
Something's
like, oh man,
something's different. It's me.
yeah. So I knew who I wasn't, and that was very important. So then I started leaning into the creative side of me, which I'd really just stifled through much of my life. Told do well in school, so that's what I tried to do. Never taking into account the fact that I love performing, I love speaking to people, doing all those kind of things. So when I started working for myself, I wasn't incredibly busy, which unfortunately I found myself with a lot of free time. Which here's a pro piece of advice for anyone that's thinking about making that leap from corporate to their side hustle. Don't be afraid to like pick up a part-time job or something to bring some semblance of money in on a consistent basis as you're getting that going. Like, unless you have like a giant portfolio, it's like, okay, this makes total sense. I didn't. So I wish I had known sooner to, have something on the side and don't be too prideful to be like, I'm a photographer now and that's all I'm going to do. It's like, okay, that's fine, but Wells Fargo doesn't care when the mortgage is due on the 13th. So, but with having that free time, which by the way, I didn't do that. That's why I like to share that information. So I had all this free time. That's when I was really able to explore like who I was becoming as a person, who I truly was, and working with coaches and podcasts and having time to read the books and just have the emotional and mental capacity to do that. So that's when I really started digging in and finding out who I was and being confident in who I am.
The internal growth is almost like going to the gym, right? We're working out emotions and mental and taking up different habits and practices. How did that play out for you as far as where you're confident with who you are and how you show up? You're not using your ability to read people to manipulate them. Instead, you're using it to encourage them and move in that direction. How did that come about? And like, what tools did you use to, build that confidence?
Yeah. So I've forever said, because people would always ask that question, like, how did you figure out to take that leap? And this is even before I became a coach. I would always tell people, the number one thing you can do is hire a coach or a mentor, like someone to guide you that has walked that path before. Because I started working with coaches whenever I realized like I'm wired different than all these people in engineering. I started hiring a coach, I think in like 2013. So over 10 years ago, I hired my own coach. I know someone I met at church and became a mentor. They were also a photographer. But they just opened up this whole world of like possibility. And that's probably the number one thing I can say is, find a coach, mentor to work with, even just to bounce ideas off of, because that will give you insight that, maybe a spouse or a close friend can't even give you. Right. Because a coach is someone who, like you mentioned, going to the gym, like they can design the program for you, but you got to lift the weights. They're not lifting them for you. But the nice part about working with kind of a outside person outside of your sphere of relationships is they can tell you the hard truth if you need to, if they need to. But that's why you hired them, right? And that, if you can get uncomfortable with that growth and learn to not take things personally, that's where like exponential growth can happen.
You mentioned earlier about like self-sabotage. How do you identify that that's something you're doing? I mean, it's almost like a subconscious thing, right?
Right.
How can you look at what's going on and how you're behaving to identify their self-sabotage, and then how do you disconnect that from being the knee-jerk reaction?
Right. Yeah, and that's a fantastic question, Mike. How do you know when you're sabotaging yourself? Because one of the things that makes sabotage successful, which sabotage is like the covert, ability to degrade performance or bring governments down, businesses, whatever it is, the ways sabotage is successful are two ways. The first way sabotage is successful is no one's aware it's happening. It's so subtle, people don't realize what's going on until it's too late. Whether you're toppling a banana republic, and your business competitor or yourself, no one knows what's happening until it's too late. The other way that sabotage is successful is you don't know who's doing it. You don't know who's doing the sabotage. So that makes it even more difficult to detect in the future. So one of the things I talk about from stage in my keynote is the inner saboteurs. I talk about two saboteurs because if we can take away their ability to operate covertly inside of ourselves and be aware of them, you've taken away a lot of that power. So the two saboteurs I talk about are the time saboteur, who whispers to you, you're not good enough as you are. And the time saboteur tells you those things, again, covertly, it whispers, you're not good enough as you are, by doing things a lot of times that can fly under the radar. Like having procrastination disguised as preparation. When we have procrastination disguised as preparation, what that looks like is, let's say you've always wanted to launch a podcast, Mike, right? Let's pretend like the Living Fearless Today podcast, it's still just a dream you have. When we disguise procrastination as preparation, you would be reading all the books about podcasts. You'd be researching the microphones about podcasts. You'd be researching the software. You would be listening to podcasts about podcasts. You'd maybe even write up a business plan. But guess what you don't actually do? The thing you say you want to do, right? But no one gives you a hard time. That's why it's so insidious. That's why it's such a self-sabotage, is no one's going to give you a hard time. It's like, man, look at Mike. He's really researching that. He really wants to do a good job. It's like, I'm not saying, put in minimal effort to stuff, but recognize when you might just be kind of going overboard. Like, do you really need to care what connector that microphone has before you launch? No, just do the thing, right? Do the thing and realize it's not going to be the end of the world if the microphone isn't the best one possible. You'll be able to course correct that later on. So that's one of the ways the time saboteur, just trips us up. The other saboteur that I talk about in my keynote is the relationship saboteur. The relationship saboteur whispers to you, you're safer and you are better off alone. Relationship saboteur says you are safer and you are better off alone. And all you need to do to get, copious amounts of backup data to that story is look at any Hollywood action hero, especially men. Like I'm talking to us guys. I'm looking at the camera, not looking at my. Listen up. You don't have to be the lone wolf. That is a myth. Lone wolves can survive out in the wilderness, but they are not going to thrive. So you don't need, the relationship saboteur it can get people in this mindset of, I need to do all this on my own. I can't ask for help. That's a sign of weakness. I don't want to burden people with this. It shows up differently. But once you can realize, it's like, wait a minute, am I going beyond the realms of just being a self-sufficient adult? Some things we do need to have some ability to operate on our own. But when we get into that mindset of, I can't ask for help, or I'll look weak, or I'll look stupid if I ask for help, that's a very big spotlight being turned on the lone wolf. Another way we do it with a relationship saboteur is you build walls up around yourself. And sometimes if people get over the wall that we've built up around ourselves and we're no longer the lone wolf, it freaks people out sometimes. Then you burn the bridges. So if you can be aware of these different ways that we sabotage ourselves, you take away already a lot of power.
And I can say I've done both of those.
Oh, yeah.
Many times.
Yeah. President of the fan club here for doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I write from experience.
Well, yeah. And when you were talking about the whole thing with podcasting, oh my gosh, I hid behind the tech. It was like, that person has this. I need that. Yeah. This person has this. I need that. No, there was like this barrier to entry that it was like, could have been 2 feet tall to get in to start podcasting. Instead, I put it as 200 feet tall so that it was like this. If I don't start, then nobody can heckle me. Nobody can give negative feedback. I'm not being susceptible to negative comments or anything like that. I can't fail.
Yeah.
And once it was like, why do I still not have the podcast launched? It was like, okay, well, what am I thinking? What am I believing? Oh, okay, great. Let's work on that now. And it continues. I mean, you look at like Mr. Beast, he's like, you've got to put out 100 bad ones to 100 bad videos to get to, a good one. It's like, there's this growth just like everything else. And the funny thing is, John, I would tell you, if you were starting anything, give yourself grace, keep working at it. It will come. I would put myself under a different lens, like a perfectionist lens, right? I can't launch until I have all my ducks in a row, until everything is perfected and at like that elite level, right? I can't do that, but I would give you the grace. Go right ahead, man. You're doing great. It's just that dichotomy there of where it's like I'm holding myself to something that's unobtainable and not even realistic.
Yeah. I always talk about give yourself grace and go again. And that's the exact barometer I always give people. I say, give yourself as much of a hard time, if you will, about something that you would give to a friend or a colleague that just made that same mistake. Because you'd probably be like, you're doing great. Or you might be like, hey, why don't you just try this? And then that'd be the end of it. Whereas if we do something or make a mistake, I can't believe I said that again. You're just beating yourself up, going 10 rounds with yourself and waking yourself up at night. Whereas if a friend did that, you would just extend that grace to them.
Yeah.
So that's
belittling and berating and under the microscope, man. Yep. Yeah. Well, John, dude, I so appreciate you coming on here, sharing like the vulnerability, the authenticity of what it was, hey, this is what it looked like from the outside. This is what was going on inside. Yeah. Because we don't see that on Pinterest. We don't get that in those meetings at work where it's like, hey, here's the project. Who's feeling insecure? That's just not a bullet point on the meeting.
Right.
And that this is not something that's permanent. It's a phase and it's over, something that can be overcome.
Right.
And I so appreciate the hope, the other option that's available to us if we'll just take the action like you talked about instead of sabotaging it.
Yep.
So, John, with that, man, how can men connect with you outside of the podcast?
Yeah. So my website's johnmollura.com, JohnMollura.com. And if you go there, you'll see a tab there that says free stuff. And the free stuff is my 6-pillar formula or workbook for elite level confidence. And what I go through there is 6 different pillars for ways that we can learn about ourselves to really step into who we are authentically with confidence. In each pillar, we talk about a misconception, which are false truths that serve us in some way, but keep us stuck in a vicious cycle of a mediocrity mindset and insecurity. Then I have a thought correction. Like we talked about the saboteurs, like how can we dismantle these misconceptions we have? And then what kind of authentic action can we take to enhance those thought corrections. And these are like practical and tactical ways. These aren't some woo thing. It's actually how to, take action practically, with tactical things we can do. And then also like to identify the confidence transformation after you take those. So if you want that, it is free for your audience's taking at johnmollura.com/free stuff.
Awesome. And John, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes so that people can go and grab that and begin delving into everything you've set out for them. So, John, I appreciate it. Thank you again, my friend.
All right, brother. Take care.